I think we're getting close on time here. Isaac will give me a cue, but before we started talking today, I said, what's really kind of on your mind, Rob? What's stuff you kind of kick around right now? And you mentioned this idea of developmental readiness. And I didn't want to ask you before the show because I want to ask you on the show. What does that really mean? And what are you kind of kicking around in your head around that these days?
Yeah, so inside the toolkit, we created a measure of developmental readiness, a developmental readiness index. And when I created it, I really was looking for a way to tap into the whole preparation of a person before they got into the whole developmental process. Like, could we assess where someone is and then assess where they are at the end of the process? And so it's gotten me even deeper now into the literature around that and into other fields, like I was mentioning before, into psychotherapy and what's known out there, not just industrial organizational psych. What do we know about executive coaching and so on? And what's fascinating about developmental readiness to me, and I think this is where my brain is going, is what does it mean to take a whole perspective on that? As opposed to, because sometimes we confuse developmental readiness with effectiveness. And what we're talking about is someone who is in a moment or a season of readiness for change. And so it changes the way we think about even the talent in an organization, because so often we say, like, who are the talent and who's not, as opposed to saying who's developmentally ready for learning and growth. Because there's certain times where my wife would say, like, I don't really want to learn right now, maybe tomorrow, but right now I need something that's a little more routine. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we need to remind ourselves of that. But I think a whole perspective, I think of it like, if I was stepping up to a starting line of a race and I was a sprinter, what actually would be going on is, what are all the things around me that prepared me for that moment, when that starting gun goes off? Like, all the training that's gone into that, the coaches and the people that have encouraged me, my understanding of the things I do well. Do I start well? Do I finish well? How I'm going to run that race. All that awareness is something that we would want someone developmentally ready to run the race. Why wouldn't we do the same with leaders? And so that's where I think about, so if we scaffolded the whole development of a person before they ran the race, what would that look like? And we know a lot about that already. And so my work around that has been, we have this quick assessment of that, but it also includes some crazy things. This is where it got even more interesting to me, Brandon, is like, is what does personality have to do with that? So development's the things that I can change, but we know a lot that at least half of leadership emergence and sometimes even effectiveness is affected by some traits. So how do my traits interact with the readiness that's around me, that interact with the context I'm in? So what is my organization trying to do? Does it fit with kind of my skill set, where I'm going? How do I contribute to that? Are all a part of this kind of whole perspective on what it means. Yeah. If I find anyone in a moment, I want to understand those things. So I hope that makes sense, but I've just been kind of geeking out all week about this stuff and in the literature and also my own work around it.
So what I took away from that is we want to consider things like personality, things like self-awareness, yep. Things like even season and stage of life. And that can be both professionally, but also personally. Yeah. Like, if you got a lot of craziness going on right now in your personal life, maybe it's not a good time to take on something really big and new in your professional life.
Absolutely.
And I've seen that. There was a piece of research that came out, this was some years ago, about 10 years ago. And a couple female researchers and scholars put this together, and they said, we often kind of target kind of the early 40s when we start tapping high potentials. But you miss a lot of women when you do that, because when they study kind of neuroscience around women's brains versus men's brains, when there's young kids in the house, it's like man's brain, like one little area is firing. Women's brain, it's like firing all over the brain, because they're really thinking about it all the time, even when they're working. And their argument was, you'd be better off starting to look for high potentials in the kind of the early 50s. Because that's often when kids have gotten older, and for women, they're often ready to take that step where they might not want to in their early 40s. So we miss them because we're not looking at the right windows, was their argument. Absolutely. And makes me think about that, which is totally cool.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. Time for one more thought on that, or do we need to wrap?
Well, I think Isaac said we're getting close on time, but I'll take another thought. I mean, this is like bonus. Okay. I mean, this stuff's
fast.
Gold.
I'll do it fast. So in the whole talent management space, maybe in the past few years, the focus has been on who are your high potentials. So you got your top 15% or something, which makes the rest of us think, well, I'm not that, so I'm in the 85. And then other people would say, if it's talent, look at the top 35%, and then look at the bottom of the top, because those are people who still have room to grow and the rest of the people way at the top, they don't need to change. And I think this whole concept we've been talking about is more about thinking about who's spinning through that moment of readiness, as opposed to saying it's either these are talented people or not, saying who are the people that are ready to change and grow. And that cycle, that could change in seasons. So it kind of is a different perspective on your whole workforce, to go on the work side of this whole thing and changing the paradigm. So yeah, that's my last thought, but it's where
I love it. I love it. This has been great. So, I ask every single one of my guests this question. What's one life hack you have for us to help us live a life more free from dysfunction, either personally or professionally?
Oh man. I think I would encourage, and I know this is spinning back, but I would encourage people to think about their why. I know that there are a lot of folks talking about that now, but to be intentional about sitting down, and I know it's hard to do, but to think about why you're in the situations that you are in as much as you think about how and what. And I think what I would suggest is that is not squishy, touchy-feely talk, that actually it can have a profound impact on your presence. And we know this from across all the literature that's out there, that how you show up and the interactions with people, the way that you show up is just as important as everything that you do or execute on.